Welcome to Maximus Live episode 76. It is now August 4th, 2022, and super happy to continue the show and have it keep rolling on. We've been doing this for over a year now. Thanks to everyone who's joining us on Twitter Spaces. I'm hosting it on my other Twitter account to see if we can get a little bit more traction today. It's a little experiment. Thanks to everyone who's joining us on Instagram Live. See a couple folks joining us, and there's got two gentlemen who are in the waiting room on Zoom. So I'll take your questions shortly. For those who are joining us for the first time, this is an hour-long call-in radio show in which we do live health coaching. And every week I like to start out with a weekly unpopular opinion about the world at large, or sort of a mental and physical health. This week's unpopular opinion is actually about a psychological phenomenon, which is regret. I think in a crazy, chaotic world that we live in, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling the pangs of regret, whether due to financial implosion, job loss, market turmoil, or even relationship turmoil these days. It's an interesting phenomenon. I see a lot of men in particular talk about this phenomenon of like, I live life with no regrets, or I have zero regrets in terms of even the mistakes that they made, because it, helped make them the man that they are today, or they obviously learned valuable lessons from it. And, I think it's an understandable attitude to have. In my opinion, it's almost a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism to say that I have zero regrets. So I think actually from an evolutionary psychology perspective, regret is such a ubiquitous and cross-cultural phenomenon. It almost assuredly has an evolutionary purpose. And I think that's true basically for any universal emotion. There's a reason we have that emotion. Shame, guilt, even though they are negative emotions or negative phenomenon, they serve some useful purpose. Otherwise, we wouldn't have them. They wouldn't stick around. And I think that's also true of regret. Obviously, if you stick your hand on a stove and burn yourself, you learn a very rapid conditioning response, and that don't do that as a kid. And you may have some retrospective regret as well in terms of, if you have lingering burns or blisters, that wasn't such a good idea. Now, would you say, okay, I don't regret doing that because I learned my lesson and I stayed away from a hot stove? Maybe, but I'm sure nobody wants to go through unnecessary pain and suffering. So my sort of unpopular opinion is regret is not about the past, actually. It's about learning a lesson from the past that extrapolates into the future. And the concern I have whenever I hear clients in particular say, oh, I wouldn't have done things any differently in my life because, well, I don't know, I like the way that my life turned out. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe you don't want a butterfly effect phenomenon, and maybe your life would have turned out worse. But on the other hand, your life could have turned out better. I think it's actually a pessimistic response to say, well, I wouldn't have, wanted things to turn out any differently. Who knows how it would have turned out? So I think the main mistake that people make with the regret is they confuse regret with rumination. Rumination is actually a behavior in which you're repeatedly focusing on the past because you kind of obsessively can't let it go. That's what most people think about when it comes to regret. And obviously that's unhealthy. I'm not encouraging everyone to sit there and stew about a relationship loss or a mistake that they made and beat themselves up over it. That's obviously psychologically unhealthy. But that's not really true regret. That's rumination. Regret is an honest appraisal and acknowledgement that, hey, I made a mistake. I actually think that requires a great deal of humility as a man to be like, you know what? I fucked up. Now, you're not going to beat yourself up over that, because I do think it is a useful paradigm to tell yourself, I did the best that I could with the limited knowledge, tools, and wherewithal that I had at the time. So I can't beat myself up. And now, obviously, with the hindsight benefit of 2020, sure, I would have made a different decision. But I did the best that I could at the time. And maybe I put myself in circumstances where maybe I wasn't in the ideal state of mind to make the right decision. But I did the best that I could at the time. So I'm not going to shame myself. I'm not going to guilt trip myself over it. So I think that's a very important point. And so we need to get away from the self-punishment, self-flagellation. And it's obviously not helpful to ruminate excessively about something that's in the past, because obviously you cannot change the past. What I think rather I'm proposing is it is useful to be able to reflect upon incidences that happened in the past and tell yourself, you know what, mistakes were made. Now, why were they made? Let me do a little bit of self-analysis in terms of why was I not in the right state of mind? Did I have limited information? Did I analyze the problem incorrectly? Was there third-party stuff going on that I wasn't able to, access good information or consultation from colleagues, therapists, et cetera, that could have helped me make better decisions? And yes, in hindsight, with the information I have now, I could have done things differently, but it's about the future, not the past, right? So the question is, if I acknowledge and accept the fact that I would have done things differently in the past, you're more likely to make a different decision going forward in the future. The concern that I have is people, if they say, I wouldn't have done things differently in the past, you're less likely to actually change things in the future versus you acknowledge that it happened, you accept that it happened, you analyze why it happened and what you would have done differently or will do differently going forward in the future, and you move on. So I actually think, contrary to popular opinion, regret is healthy. You should have a decent modicum of regret about mistakes, because obviously, if you don't go back and are almost, I think, embarrassed about your past self, then you haven't grown, or you have enough denial that you aren't able to acknowledge that, yes, at some point you were a less evolved version of yourself. No one is born with emotional maturity, or certainly not wisdom. That has to come from life experience. So I think it's useful to be able to be like, yeah, you know what? I wasn't as smart, wise, evolved as I am now. And that's a good thing. I've grown. And so that requires going back in the past and being like, yeah, mistakes were made. There are some regrets there. And I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm not going to ruminate excessively over it. But it's an acknowledgement and exception of flaw, that we are flawed human beings, that we're not perfect. And I think it's useful to be able to say, yeah, I regret that, because that acknowledges that I'm human, essentially. Versus the tough guy, especially Twitter personas that are like, oh yeah, zero regrets. Therapies for pussies. This is nonsense machismo bravado that guys have, especially in their fake online personas, especially the anonymous ones, I would say, where they talk this tough guy talk, and I don't think they're honestly the most emotionally evolved or wise people who do that. So my unpopular opinion, healthily regret stuff that happened with a focus on the future rather than the past, because that way you acknowledge and have humility of your limitations as a human being, and you accept that, and you grow, and you're more likely to make better decisions in the future if you can acknowledge that you would have done things differently in the past. So use it, don't stew on it. All right, with that being said, I'm going to bring some folks up to ask some questions.
What's up?
Hi there, how you doing?
Very good. It's Dr. Cam, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank
Oh, I think I lost your audio for a second there. Yep, can you still hear me?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, how can I help
Yeah,
you?
I'm good. Well, I guess I just wanted to talk to you guys about the Maximus Protocol. I'm already on the Lover Protocol as it is, and
Excellent.
I was interested. I was interested in doing the hormone optimization as well with the enclomiphene.
That's right.
But I had a doctor. I actually forgot the name of my doctor. In the Maximus portal, but he didn't want to give me the enclomiphene because I had elevated prolactin and elevated LH, or perhaps it was prolactin and FSH. I forget, but one of those two. And I tried speaking to him about it. I explained to him that the reason they were elevated was because I'm already on clomiphene. And I've been on clomid for a very, very long time at this point. So that it was elevated because of that. Before I started taking the clomid, they weren't elevated.
Yep.
So, my doctors told me that must be why, and that Encloiphene potentially would have a much healthier side effect profile.
Correct.
So, that's actually exactly why I signed up for the program, but he disagreed. He said, I can't prescribe this to you with such elevated levels, which, with all due respect, I think it's kind of ignoring the fact that under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be elevated. It's because I'm taking this medication and I'm actually trying to get rid of this medication by substituting with enclomiphene. So, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
I mean to circumvent everything.
No. I just think this is a communication issue. I think you're right. I understand where you're coming from. So the right thing to do is, if you're willing to do so, is discontinue the clomiphene. Get clean labs tested, and obviously, if your hypothesis is that it's causing the elevations in the prolactin, LH, and FSH, because I assume you did those labs from a third party, right? You did them someplace else, because we don't test prolactin, for instance.
Yes, that's exactly right. I took those tests with my urologist who prescribed me the enclomiphene in the first place a few months ago.
Have you? So you said you've been off the clomid or the clomiphene?
Very, very little. It's only been 4 days, and I was on it every day for quite some time. I think more than a year, maybe even 2. I don't know how long it would take for me to get clean, honestly, at this point.
Well, so here's the tricky thing. The enclomiphene has a very short half-life, so that's going to come out of your system pretty quickly. It's like 10 and a half hours. The clomifene isomer can linger for weeks, and so that may take a little bit longer. But in terms of the elevation in LH and FSH, that should decrease pretty quickly, I would say. Probably, I'm guesstimating here, probably within about a week or so. So here's what I would suggest. Yeah, now the estradiol decrease may take longer because that clomifene isomer is acting as an estrogen agonist, essentially. So
estradiol is quite good, though, actually. It's quite normal.
Okay, well, then it may not be as much of a concern. So here's what I would suggest. Write to our doctor and say, hey, new information. I've discontinued the clomiphene, which I was taking for a long time. I would like to just get a clean lab test. They'll send you our at-home lab test, take that, and then have the numbers come back. And then with a clean lab test, I think he can make an informed decision about prescribing enclomiphene.
No, of course. That's actually exactly what I've already done. I told him that, and I do have the blood test right here. I just, I was primarily wanted to speak to you because I just wanted to know about the timing, exactly when I should take the blood test, because I only have one of these. I don't want to take it prematurely.
Yeah, so, I would say 1 week minimum being off of it, maybe better closer to 2 weeks if you want to just be like absolutely sure. But I think that would do it. I mean, the 3 markers that we're measuring on that test are total testosterone, luteinizing hormone, LH, and SHBG, and then we calculate free testosterone. So technically 4 markers. But so are you taking anything else besides, or you came off the clomiphene? Are you taking anything else besides that in the Lever protocol?
I was taking an anastrozole, but I came off that as well. No, I don't think so. Other than typical over-the-counter supplements.
Now, you should be aware that anastrozole is a non-steroidal aromatase inhibitor, and so it can have a little bit of a rebound effect in terms of your estradiol levels. So maybe that's why your estradiol levels were in fact controlled, because you were taking it. When you stop taking it, there is sometimes a little flare-up in terms of estradiol that happens. Now, again, it's not as relevant to us. I'm just telling you this for your own information because we're not measuring it at this point.
Right.
So, but when your estradiol levels just get a little wonky, everything can get a little wonky. Hormones sometimes they don't act totally independently from one another. So, now how long does that take to clear out? So that's what I would say. This is not like perfect science, but I would say 1 week minimum, 2 weeks to be super conservative and safe. Not being on anything else other than obviously what we just discussed. You should have a pretty clean lab value, and I don't think your LH should be elevated to a super physiological level that would cause the physicians to be concerned about prescribing it. Because I'll tell you, their main concern though is just safety, and they don't want someone who's before taking any of our drugs, they're already elevated to begin with, and they're pushing you up to a very high superphysiological range. Now, I don't think that will happen here, but the best way to basically, allay their concerns is just have a clean lab test, have normal levels, and they'll be able to, like I said, make an informed decision from there.
Okay, I think I understand. I'll give it a couple of weeks from now. And let's see here. This is just purely a logistical question, but let's say I want to begin the program again on September 1st. And how long exactly does it take, for example, once you receive the blood test, assuming everything checks out, to have the medication ordered? Usually, like, what's the turnaround time, I guess?
It depends on when you send in the lab. If you send, they encourage you to send in the labs on a Monday through Friday because it has to ship next day to the lab for the stability of the blood. So then it's usually pretty fast. So as from the time that the lab receives it, they'll usually process it within 2 days. So let's say you send it off on a Monday, it's received on a Tuesday, then probably by Thursday or Friday they'll have the lab results back. Doctor reviews that within 24 hours. Now, if that falls on a Friday, like it comes in a Friday, they may not review it until a Monday, and then they can make a prescribing decision. And then the medication is usually shipped via, I think, 2-day priority shipping. So 2 days after the prescription is written.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So just basically, I would allocate a week for the lab testing, a day for the doctor to review it, and then 2 days for shipment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like middle of August. If I wanted to start September 1st, would be ideal.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Give me about a couple weeks.
Yeah, and you've been off for 4 days. Mid-August is about 10, so that's about 2 weeks. So yeah, I think that's pretty corresponding to my sort of suggestions anyway.
Okay, I hope that'll be enough time. Okay, so that pretty much covers the Maximus Tri protocol, Lever protocol. I already started. By the way,
how are you doing on that, by the way?
Well, I was actually going to ask you about that. So far I feel exactly the same. I know it's supposed to lead to like an increase of libido or something, but I mean, it's only been 4 days. I don't know. Maybe it's too early to say, but I actually feel about the same. Is that normal?
Individual results vary. For some people, they do need a little bit more time for the PT-141 or the bremelanotide effects to start to accumulate a little bit over time. It is more, like I said, more subtle than the injectable forms. That's by design. I think the injectable forms are almost too strong because they induce nausea and other sort of undesirable side effects. You should though, however, from certainly the tadalafil side of things, be able to notice an immediate effect from just the increased blood flow.
I can't say I do, to be honest with you. Although, unfortunately, I actually do have like legit erectile dysfunction, so I'm actually going to an implant doctor about that because I have like a very severe condition. So 5 milligrams tadalafil not having an effect is not a surprise. I was primarily interested in the sublingual PT-141.
Right.
By the way, just as an aside, I just want to make sure I'm taking this stuff correctly. I'm letting it dissolve under my tongue.
Correct.
And then once it's like all liquid, I just swallow it. Is that normal?
Yeah, exactly. Let it dissolve under your tongue. I suggest sort of like swishing it around your mouth so that it increases the absorption through the mucous membranes of your mouth as well. And then obviously if there's any left, it's fine to just swallow it.
So yeah, actually I was about to ask you, what if I were to just, instead of letting it dissolve, can I just swallow it or would that not be as effective?
It would not be as effective. It'll be fine for the tadalafil. Tadalafil has good oral bioavailability, so like from an ED perspective, it'll work either way. But the bremelanotide is not very orally bioavailable. So if you just swallowed it, you definitely are not going to get the effects of the second drug. So that's why I'm like, basically keep it under your tongue / your mouth as long as it's practically possible. Like I obviously like walking around with like a mouthful of saliva like for an hour is not reasonable. But if you can at least do it for a few minutes, I would say it's gonna enhance the absorption of it. My question to you is: Have you ever taken any PDE5 inhibitors like a tadalafil or sildenafil before, and has that helped your ED?
Yes, I have, and actually, I just recently came off of daily 20 milligrams of tadalafil, but even that is like practically ineffective at this point. When I say I have severe ED, it's not a joke. It's like ending. Like if I'm ready for an implant, that means it's like
totally.
It, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I mean, look, I think you're answering kind of your own question here. If 20 milligrams of tadalafil by itself is not helpful, then obviously 5 milligrams on ours clearly is not going to be helpful from an ED perspective. Um,
Yeah.
so the really the potential benefit for you is the potential libido enhancing benefit from the bremelanotide. But it's a
Yeah.
little bit of
Exactly.
a challenge because, well, what's the point of having a better libido if you're not having a good erections, right? You need both, obviously, to have good sexual performance and satisfaction. So yeah, I think your case is more complicated, obviously, than just that. So you may need some combination treatment where you got to kind of address your ED, through other means. I certainly, by the way, would look. I don't know if you've tried a penis pump, but they can be actually very effective for folks when they get the right one and utilize it properly. And that in combination with the pharmacological treatment can be helpful.
Are you referring to the one with the ring at the base? Because I'm not interested in any mechanical like tools. The reason I want to go for the implant is just because, yeah, it's extreme, but once it's in, like you don't ever have to have any external support whatsoever in any capacity.
Right. Yeah. I mean that's obviously a decision for you and your doctor to make. I think people have their pros and cons, but I do think given it is less severe, it doesn't hurt to try. You know what I mean? But obviously, patient preference and comfort are very different in terms of what people want and like. So I don't blame you if you don't. I just wanted to at least throw it out there as a relatively non-invasive option.
I understand. By the way, you mentioned swishing the saliva in your mouth. Assuming I don't mind like living with a mouthful of saliva,
Hmm.
what would you say is like the max amount of time to keep in your mouth, just to maximize its absorption? There's no doubt that I got 100% of the medication into my system.
Yeah, I don't think there's a max. So here's the issue, right? Basically, the longer you hold it in your mouth, your saliva will just accumulate over time, right?
Right.
And so it's not at some point the sort of the osmosis that's happening in terms of the drug permeating transdermally through your mucous membranes is gonna just sort of hit its equilibrium point, so to speak. So more is not better past a certain threshold of time. Now, what exactly is that? I don't know because individual pharmacokinetics basically differ. I would say, look, just practically speaking, as long as it's fully dissolved and you've had it in your mouth for, I don't know, let's say 5 minutes, I'm not sure you're going to get that much greater benefit from holding it around your mouth.
Yeah, I understand. That's exactly what I'm doing. I can't help but think of LSD, honestly. I mean, it's literally the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, these sessions are primarily designed just for the two different programs you guys offer, right? Or is it also for like just general overall?
Oh yeah, no, we definitely talk about health behavior stuff too. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about nutrition, exercise, sleep, focus, relationships. That's my whole background as a psychologist.
You're a psychologist?
I'm a psychologist and psychiatry professor. Yep.
I understand. Well, in terms of diet, I'm starting law school very soon, and I'm moving to a new state. So I've already identified a very nice meal prep and delivery program. We have a local dietitian on campus, so I'm just going to have her construct my meals and then just eat religiously whatever she prescribes. So that whole process will be automated.
Excellent.
Relationships, part of my French dude, my dick does not work. Let me get this implanted.
Right.
We'll talk.
By the way,
See
just one thing on meal deliveries. I was actually talking to a client of mine about this. I am a fan of them. Obviously, if you don't have sort of the time or wherewithal to cook, they can obviously be a good option. Just one thing to watch out for is just the frequency in which you use them. Like I had a client, for instance, that was using 2 meal replacements a day, but they're very high in sodium, almost all of them. So I would just be sure to read the nutritional label and be aware of how much sodium you're getting, just because excessive sodium drives up blood pressure. And, sometimes if you're having sort of vasculature issues, they can, make the situation worse. So I generally encourage people to not have more than one, like meal delivery, especially that's like a high sodium one per day, because they usually have at least 1 to 2 grams of sodium, which is not terrible. But once you're obviously doubling or tripling that, now you're getting into like the 3 to 4, 5 to 6 gram range, and that's high, honestly, for most people. Most people should try to keep their sodium intake to less than 3 grams a day. And I always tell people actually what's more important is that you keep your potassium sodium ratio to at least 1 to 1. So you're trying to get more potassium than sodium, which most people don't measure, but if you ever do it once, you can track on chronometer, just see how much potassium you're getting and is it more than your sodium intake. And that really helps keep your blood pressure at an even equilibrium, and make sure your whole vasculature system is operating at the best that it can. Because if you're thinking holistically about this, it's all great that you taking whether it's a physical or pharmacological approach to ED, but you want to make sure your blood pressure and other things are not like confounding factors.
Of course, I understand. My blood pressure currently is quite normal, and I don't
Good.
think milk liver will be an issue because it's locally prepared meals by like a restaurant or something. So it's not it's not like one of those national chains where they deliver
Yeah.
frozen food or anything
Well,
like that.
yeah, I mean that's still local restaurants also douse their stuff in sodium, just gargantuan amounts of sodium. It's just it makes food taste better, obviously, but yeah,
Yeah.
I would still, if you can, I don't know if there's any customization. I would just tell them to cut down on the salt because restaurants are honestly just as bad.
In fact, I think there is, so I'll keep that in mind. Okay, let's see here. I know you mentioned some other stuff that you primarily deal with, but I think we're kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel. I should be good for now.
Okay.
I'll just follow up on what we discussed then. I'll send in that blood test, and I hope I can start the enclomiphene because I actually really like clomiphene.
Yeah.
I just don't like the side effects.
No, I don't blame you. What do you know what dosage you're on of or you were on of clomiphene?
50 milligrams a day. Isn't that the standard?
It actually varies quite a bit in terms of what people take. So yeah, I mean it's a high dose. And do you know what your response was on it? Like how much did it increase your testosterone?
Yeah, it more than doubled it.
Yeah.
Memory serves, my original testosterone was like 400. It was on like the lower end of the normal spectrum. And then by the time it was over, it was on the higher end of the spectrum at around 1,000.
Yeah.
So I had testosterone-wise a great response. My estradiol got elevated briefly, but then the estradiol got that under control. Let's see here. My free T was pretty good. I don't know anything about my SHBG, but I assume that my free T was good, and that was probably fine too.
Did you notice a difference adding the aromatase inhibitor? I know it can obviously bring your estradiol numbers down. I'm just curious if it changed how you felt.
Well, I actually felt pretty good from beginning to end, even when my estradiol levels were elevated. I did that purely because of the blood test.
Right.
I wasn't noticing any symptoms. I don't even know what you're supposed to notice in a situation like that. Like you're more emotional or something. I have no clue.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and this is kind of like a debate in the clinical community about whether you should add an aromatase inhibitor, especially in the context of a SERM, because clomid is already blocking the estrogen receptors. So even though your estradiol is elevated in terms of your blood levels, it's not really doing anything. It's just kind of like hanging out. So that's the debate is like, does it actually make a difference or not? I don't particularly think so. That's why I was curious if your experience was telling you something different. But if you weren't getting sort of high estradiol symptoms, which like emotional lability, sometimes like people report like crying at random moments. Sometimes people get some ocular issues. Those are sort of typical clomid sort of symptoms, but it's not necessarily, well, it's not even clear if it's necessarily due to the high estradiol versus just the direct agonism of the clomid isomer on the receptors. So yeah, in this context, we don't prescribe AIs. I think what our philosophy is just titrating the dosage correctly so that you're just feeling your best. If you're taking if you were taking 50 milligrams of clomid or clomiphene, that's 62% enclomiphene essentially. So you were basically taking 31 milligrams of enclomiphene already through the 50 milligrams of clomid. So you probably would benefit from it's like 25 milligrams of enclomiphene, although it's not an exact science in terms of the equivalency. Enclomiphene does seem to be more potent than clomid. Maybe it's just like because it's pure and doesn't have the clomid isomer, which is sort of working against the enclomiphene isomer. It does seem to be more potent even on like a milligram per milligram basis. So you could actually do fine on, let's say, even 12.5 milligrams of enclomiphene. I would say somewhere between 12.5 to 25 milligrams of enclomiphene would probably be the right dose, but I'll let your physician sort of figure that out.
The max dose of enclomiphene is also 50, isn't it?
No, like nobody takes 50 of the enclomiphene. Like I said, it's much more potent. The highest that the clinical trials tested was 25, and that's pretty potent, I would say. It's not even clear that it's actually even that much stronger than the 12 and a half. It's not a linear outcome where if you double the dosage, it'll continue to increase your testosterone by 2x. So 12 and a half, 25 milligrams is the highest dosage us and basically anywhere offers.
I understand. I mean, of course, it's up to my physician, but I'm always a fan of. They say more isn't necessarily better, but I live in the opposite direction.
Well, yeah,
I'll
but it's just more potent. That's why I'm telling you that like 12 and a half to 25 milligrams of enclomiphene would basically be equivalent to 50 milligrams of clomid. Both
Well, I understand.
both pharmacologically, but also just a little bit in terms of our clinical experience too. It's very very strong, much stronger than I would say enclomiphene. In fact, we have a lot of guys on 6.25 milligrams of enclomiphene, and they're doubling their levels on that low dose. So which you would never see on clomid. So we base that on a lot of learnings that we've had, even the clinical trials. Typically work with folks that are hypogonadal. Maybe it's also because we work with a healthier population. The healthier you are, the more responsive your testes are. Essentially, the lower the dosage that you need. But the other thing is, look, we can always adjust up. If for instance, the doctor wanted you on 12 and a half, you could be on it for 30 days, see how you feel, and then adjust upward from there.
Okay. Also, I know you guys are starting this new program where you have like a supplement that comes with it.
Correct.
When does that begin?
Hopefully soon. We had some supply chain issues. We actually we were basically launching it, but decided to pull back. So we're talking to our supplier. Hopefully in the next couple weeks.
Okay. I mean, I understand it's all conjecture now, but do you think maybe by September 1st? I mean, is it possible?
I hope to God it does. I mean, we're working as frantically as we can. Unfortunately it requires a third party manufacturer to produce, so it's honestly more up to them than it is us. But hopefully, yeah. Obviously, if it is available by September 1st, we'll love to basically include it with your prescription, and if not, we'll get it out to you hopefully by the next month.
Okay, that's fine. And other than the lever protocol and the enclomiphene and that supplement when it's finally ready, there's pretty much nothing else you guys offer for the time being, right?
We are launching a new protocol every quarter. So actually, by the end of September, there'll be a new protocol. It's going to be a hair and beard growth protocol, which I'm super excited about. It's going to be a topical, and it's very unique. It's not going to use finasteride or dutasteride, which I don't think is super safe.
I already have ED, man. I don't need more ED.
Exactly.
So, yeah, good. Did you say it's topical?
It is topical. Yeah, you just apply it on your head or your beard.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll keep an eye out for that. Let's see. I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm sorry for being so vague.
No, it's great.
Anything else you think we should discuss?
I think those are really good, pointed questions, and I'm sorry for the back and forth miscommunication. But yeah, I think if you just wait till mid-August, send in your new lab results. Hopefully they'll be clear, and then the physician can make a prescribing decision and get you going.
Okay. Sorry, I just have one last question for you. If by September 1st, assuming I actually start the trial protocol, assuming I start the enclomiphene, let's say the new supplement isn't ready yet.
Right.
I know you have those ASK building blocks, but those have apparently been discontinued.
Correct.
Is that true?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, so I guess I already answered my own question. So I wouldn't be able to do that in September.
No, yeah, we phase that out in order to basically have our own custom supplement that's much more robust. So yeah, that we're making that transition right now.
Okay. In that case, I won't keep you anymore. Thank you very much for your time.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, and if you have further questions, just hop on our Discord at discord.maximustribe.com. I'm always in the King Protocol or the health coaching channels.
All right, we'll do.
Thank you. Take care.
I guess we'll be in touch. Take care.
Sounds
Bye.
good. Someone asked, Isn't it bad for your eyes? That is so ocular issues are a known side effect of clomid or clomiphene, which we do not prescribe. And usually it's only seen at the higher dosages of it. So when people are taking 25, 50 milligrams a day, a small percentage of people report sort of floaters and sort of similar eye issues. It's typically not seen in the lower dosages of it. And it's never been reported, in fact, with enclomiphene. We have literally thousands of guys on it. I haven't gotten a single case report of any ocular issues, and it hasn't been reported in the research literature. It's probably due to the zuclomiphene isomer. That's why enclomiphene is better from a side effect profile perspective, or just using a lower dose of clomid. So I don't think it's a concern. Another person asked, can enclomiphene lower IGF-1 permanently? No, it doesn't have any permanent effects in the sense of if you discontinue the medication, you should essentially all of your levels, including IGF-1, should go back to normal. Now, the research literature does show a statistically significant decrease in IGF-1. Now, it's unclear if what the meaning of that is. In fact, the original researchers argued it's unclear because they didn't measure growth hormone and other relevant markers, and it still was within the normal range. So it's still keeping your IGF-1 normal. It's not becoming sub-physiological or abnormal. And so is it actually making any sort of meaningful difference in that result, in that regard? No. It's unclear if it is. And then second, we use lower dosages in healthier guys, and some of the guys have gone and actually measured their IGF-1 and found actually very little to no change on enclomiphene. So it doesn't necessarily decrease IGF in everyone. It's just a trend in that direction on higher dosages in the research literature. In the real world, on lower dosages in healthier guys, it may or may not actually have that effect. So we're not particularly concerned about it. And in fact, lowering IGF-1 may have some anti-cancer effect. So maybe it is actually a good thing. So I don't think it's actually too much of a concern. But good question.
We had a question via YouTube. Hi, Dr. Cam. I'm new to the King Protocol, and my supplements are arriving tomorrow. However, is there any reason to concern for heart, liver, or kidney problems like with TRT or steroids?
Yeah, so very common question about are there cardiovascular, liver, or kidney issues with the King Protocol? First of all, actually, it's kind of a misnomer that TRT causes cardiovascular issues. If you look at the recent meta-analyses and the recent research, there's an argument that even TRT is not bad for your heart, in fact. In fact, it may be cardioprotective if you have obesity and metabolic syndrome. Like if you're severely overweight, it can actually help with weight loss. And obviously, if you take the weight off, it puts less strain on your overall heart and health. And so, ironically, there's some studies that show that people on TRT, if they're metabolically unhealthy and obese in the first place, live longer, right? Because you're almost like addressing their metabolic syndrome. Now, I would speculate that if you're, young, healthy, otherwise fit, it wouldn't necessarily make you better. It's really more of a treatment, I guess, in that regard. So yeah, I don't think actually there's a heart concern with TRT. There's certainly not a heart concern with our protocol. Liver and kidney issues, no. So they have measured liver enzyme AST/ALT with enclomiphene. Doesn't seem to have any negative effects on the liver. And no reported kidney effects as well. So if you're otherwise healthy, you don't have any underlying issues with your kidneys or your liver or your heart, I don't think it would essentially have any contraindications. The one thing is that all SERMs do have some risk of clotting, which is not a concern for normal people. But if you have some blood clotting disorder, which you'd know because you'd be on some blood clotting medications, that is a contraindication for enclomiphene. You don't really see that in most healthy people. Usually people are pretty sick if they're having clotting issues. So if you're on any clotting medication or anticoagulants, things like warfarin, that's a contraindication. That's the only thing I would say you really need to watch out for. Otherwise, it's pretty healthy. And I would actually argue it's probably going to be beneficial in that when you optimize your testosterone levels, general overall health is improved.
We had another question from YouTube. I just got my results today. I'm at 52.5 total. Will my body become dependent on this treatment? And then he corrected saying he has 304 total and he's just starting.
Yeah, that sounds like more like a total testosterone number. Was the 50 his free? Yeah, and that's his baseline, like before starting the protocol. So yeah, this is someone with, low free and total testosterone. They're correlated essentially, usually. Now it does depend on your SHBG level, but that's a pretty low level, right? You're probably in the single digit percentile compared to most young healthy men. Someone who's at a 300 is basically almost on the border of being hypogonadal or low testosterone. Same thing with a guy who's about 50 in terms of free testosterone. So you definitely have room for improvement, and you're going to probably feel the boost when you increase your testosterone when you're starting out essentially lower than 95% of most men. So what was his question about?
Does your body become dependent on enclomiphene?
No. So that's actually the great thing about the King Protocol that we developed. There's no dependency that happens. So how it works is basically by blocking or antagonizing the estrogen receptors, the body essentially is tricked into thinking it doesn't have enough estradiol. And so as a result of that, your hypothalamus produces more LH and FSH. Your hypothalamus produces more GnRH, which stimulates the pituitary to produce more LH and FSH, which stimulates the testes to produce more of its own natural testosterone. So basically, as long as you're taking the medication, your testes literally will become bigger, increases testicular volume on the higher dosages, and will pump out more testosterone. And so what happens if you stop taking it? Your levels will just go back to where they started from. So there's no dependence on it. Unlike TRT, where if you discontinue it, you won't just go back to normal. You'll actually go below normal, so you'll be subphysiological, and there is dependence on TRT. That's why we do not do TRT, because it almost becomes like a lifelong decision, as they say, in terms of creating dependency on it. I think for what we're trying to do, which is address a much more mainstream consumer audience, it's something that you essentially can try, and if it doesn't provide you the benefit or the number increase that you're looking for, you can discontinue it and not be concerned about any dependence or even discontinuation issues. If you literally stop taking the medication at any time, you don't need to titrate it. You shouldn't have any side effects or withdrawal effects because there is no dependence. It's just a boost that gets you higher or better than normal and will just put you back to normal. So in the relative safety spectrum of medications, it's relatively safe. All right, so got some Instagram questions. Is there a minimum testosterone level you recommend for the King Protocol? Is the question there, is there a minimum in terms of what you need to get on the protocol? Because if that's your question, there's no cutoff or quantitative cutoff of like, oh, you have to be below a certain number to be on our protocol. Our advisors say we treat symptoms, not numbers. So a lot of their prescribing decision is just to make sure that you're not abnormally high in the first place, which is rare anyway. If you're natural, it's very rare that you're going to be super physiological, especially in this day and age of low T. We almost never see people who are like have naturally high testosterone anymore. So he looks like you clarified your question. What would you need to be on the protocol? So it's based on the symptoms. You fill out an online medical questionnaire, and it's asking you questions about your motivation, your drive, your libido, your work performance, your athletic performance. These are symptoms that in the research literature are associated with low testosterone or suboptimal testosterone. So if you're basically not feeling your best with testosterone-related symptoms and you have levels that are within the normal range, then physician can make a prescribing decision based on that. So the reason we measure your levels is not because of a hard cutoff. It's because we want to know where you're at, prescribe the correct dosage for you, and obviously prove that it works. Because, with all the supplements, people are taking snake oil. I have no idea whether it works or not. With us, we're using a third-party lab. We don't even do the testing ourselves. It's done by an objective party, and then we can look at the improvement. And obviously, if it doesn't go up, we'll literally refund your money. We have a 90-day money-back guarantee for that reason. The additional reason we do that is because we can use that, your physician can use that to adjust your dosage. If you're not getting as much of a response as you'd like, you can always increase the dosage. Or if you're getting too much of a response, we can decrease your dosage. We actually have a small percentage of guys who are on 3.125 milligrams of enclomiphene, which is typically not seen, but they're super responsive, and so they just don't need that much. I really believe in taking the minimal effective dose, the MED, to get the most bang for your buck. More is not always better, contrary to American sentiments. Someone asked a question of, can you stack enclomiphene with HCG? No, there's no point of doing that. People keep asking that question. They work through similar mechanisms, but enclomiphene is superior. HCG is basically injectable synthetic LH, and it basically suppresses your endogenous or natural production of LH. It also doesn't do much for FSH, which is responsible for the production of your sperm. Enclomiphene, because it stimulates the back pathways, it increases both your natural LH and your natural FSH. So if you took HCG, you'd be suppressing your endogenous production, while on enclomiphene, you'd be increasing your endogenous production. It's like putting the gas and the brakes on your car at the same time. So I don't think it's particularly, I don't think the physiology really warrants it. And also why, when you have an oral, easy to take medication, deal with an injectable. HCG is annoying and it's really expensive now that's been classified as a biologic. And there's a bunch of guys, in fact, on our forum, you can go look on our discussion forum, who used to be on HCG, didn't find a lot of benefit, either in terms of testosterone increase, nor in terms of symptomatic improvement, switch to our protocol and they feel a lot better. I just think enclomiphene is a way better solution than HCG. HCG only makes sense in the context of injecting TRT in order to maintain your testicular volume. That makes sense in that context, but on our protocol, it's not needed. And if it was, well, we would have already thought about it, quite honestly. What's the max dose? Currently on 6.25. We have dosages as low as 3.125 milligrams all the way up to 25 milligrams. So there is a higher dose. There's 12.5, 25 milligrams. But again, more is not always better. You do any medication, you increase the dose, you increase the risk of side effects. With SERMs in general, they block the estrogen receptor selectively in certain parts of your body, including the brain. If you block it too much, it can actually decrease your libido. Now, most of the time, it increases your libido on low dosages, but if you take too much, it can actually decrease your libido. So that's why I'm saying more is not always better, because some of the benefit that you get on lower dosages, you might actually have the opposite effect on higher dosages. That's why pharmacology is complicated. So you don't want to just jack up your levels to as much as possible. The clinical trials generally found that 12.5 was the most effective dose for folks who were hypogonadal in the first place, meaning they're low testosterone. But we find generally healthier guys do very well on 6.25 milligrams. In fact, a lot of guys will double their levels on that lower dosage. So that's why we typically start most people on 6.25. And I think the overwhelming majority of probably 3/4 of our patients are on 6.25 with good success. They get about a 1.7x increase on average across the board. All right. One of our members said, I've been getting liver enzyme kidney function tests with cyst, RMC, and CBC, and have not had any issues, have been on since February. Thank you for chiming in with those. So this was in reference to a previous question about, does it have any adverse effects on the heart, liver, or kidney? It sounds like we have a member who, when independently, got some testing on liver and kidney function and found no issue. So thank you for chiming in with that additional data. And we know that from the research literature. That's why we don't test it, because it's been tested and in clinical trials, and just through the mechanism of action, we know it shouldn't have any adverse effects on those organ systems. Do you have any experience with patients who are obese and on enclomiphene? Is it contraindicated? We have a lot of folks who are either overweight or obese because we deal with Americans. 70% of adult Americans are overweight or obese. It's about half and half. About 35% are overweight, about 35% are obese. So yeah, probably a third of our patients, assuming that they're representative of the general adult population, are probably obese. I don't know if we're totally representative. We probably have a little bit, I would assume a little bit healthier guys, because we work with a lot of professionals essentially. But I've definitely seen BMIs in the 30 plus, which is clearly the obese range. No, it's not contraindicated. In fact, I would argue it's even more beneficial if you're obese. Here's the reality: if you're a young, healthy, skinny guy with normal to normal high testosterone, you're not going to feel the effects of the protocol as much because you don't feel bad, right? You're not symptomatic. Now, you may feel slightly better, but it's not going to be a night and day difference going from a testosterone of 450 to 900 or a free testosterone of 100 to 200. You'll feel more energy, more motivation, more drive, more confidence. But if you're already good, it's like, how much can you go if you're an 8? How much difference are you going to feel if you're an 8 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10, right? Or a 4 out of 5 to a 5 out of 5 as we measure on some of our symptom questionnaires. But if you're obese, you're having typically low testosterone because you're over aromatizing your testosterone into estradiol. So your T to E ratio, your testosterone to estrogen ratio, is thrown off. And so for those guys, blocking estrogen is going to be very beneficial. And it'll boost your testosterone levels. You're more likely to be symptomatic, obviously, if you're obese. And so you have more room for improvement. So I would actually argue you're going to feel more of a benefit, in fact, if you're overweight or obese, on any sort of estrogen blocking, controlling protocol like ours, than guys who have really normal levels of body fat, normal levels of estrogen. So it's indicated, not contraindicated, I would say. The only thing is you may need a different dosage, obviously. If you weigh 300 pounds versus 150 pounds, obviously you metabolize medication differently, and we may need to have you on a little bit of a higher dose. How long did it start seeing benefits? 2 weeks in. I assume you're referring to the fact that you're 2 weeks in. So people, in terms of the subjective effects, often can feel it within days to the first week. But like I said, that varies individually in terms of what your starting point is and what the symptom is that you're trying to address. Now, in terms of testosterone levels, studies show that levels peak about 28 days in. So we retest people after 30 days because that's going to see the biggest before and after change. So I would say at least give it a month minimum to see that maximum increase in testosterone. You may feel it sooner, but you need to give it a few weeks to give it the good old college try. It sounds like they're following up and saying, I have a 400 total testosterone, 50 free testosterone starting point. So your total's not bad. 400 is definitely within the normal range, but your free is a little low. I'm assuming that's probably because you have high SHBG. So you definitely have some room for improvement on the free. It depends on what your symptoms are. I don't know how you're feeling. You can chime in there on the Instagram chat. But that's really what's going to make a difference in terms of how much room you have for improvement on those things. And is it confounded by other things? Last thing I'll say on this is, I always just repeat this to folks. Like, a lot of guys will say, I have low energy. And then they'll go on the protocol and they'll be like, well, I don't necessarily feel a difference in terms of my energy levels. And I'm like, okay, what's going on with you? And they're like, well, I have insomnia and huge sleep problems. I'm getting 5 hours of sleep a night. And I'm like, well, that makes total sense. There is no magic pill in the world that can override the effects of sleep deprivation. Sure, you can take caffeine, but that just temporarily masks your fatigue. When the caffeine wears off, you're just as tired, if not more tired, because caffeine also further messes with your sleep and it causes this negative perpetuating cycle. There's no medication that can make up for chronic sleep deprivation in the world. There is no limitless pill. Believe me, if there was, we'd sell it. But testosterone, as much as a magical hormone as it is, cannot make up for poor health behaviors. So I also caveat, and that's why we do the health coaching on this show, of yes, you get an energy boost from increased testosterone, but it can't fix underlying, especially sleep issues. So if you got some underlying issues that are maybe more root cause of fatigue, make sure you're addressing the behavioral side as well. That combination can make a huge difference, though, because one, there's nothing that's going to make you feel as good as getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Two, increasing your sleep will increase your testosterone by 10 to 15% by every extra hour of sleep you get up to 8 hours. And three, it's synergistic, right? When your health behaviors are healthy and in line, most of your hormones are released at night when you're sleeping. It'll help regulate your hormone levels, and then it'll basically be synergistic with the enclomiphene, because remember, enclomiphene is stimulating your own natural production. So you have to sleep in order to release your hormones, and you take the medication to enhance essentially that pulsatile release that happens at night. So that's why we really believe in this holistic program. You got to do both. And so if you're treating yourself like shit and hoping that medication can almost make up for a shitty lifestyle, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it's not going to do that. So make sure that you take advantage of the health coaching. Like I said, join us on discord.maximustribe.com. If you do have some sleep issues, I have a specialty in sleep disorders. In fact, one of the few psychologists that's trained in doing CBTI, or cognitive behavioral therapy, for insomnia. So can definitely help you out there if you're willing to do the hard work, but most people aren't. So it is what it is. High SHBG, it's mostly genetic. That's why our advisors actually don't generally recommend chasing numbers with SHBG. Now, there may be some other things. If you're vitamin D deficient, it can artificially elevate it. That's why we include a high dose 10,000 IUs of vitamin D in our building block supplement, which will be hopefully out next month. But other than that, it's mostly genetic. So I wouldn't stress about SHBG. I always tell people your body essentially compensates for high SHBG by producing more total testosterone. Guys who have high SHBG have more total testosterone, and it equals out, because if you have low SHBG, you have lower total testosterone, but your free testosterone is the same. That's why I always give the analogy of the two biological twins. If you have identical twins, one has high SHBG, the other has low SHBG, they're going to end up with the same free testosterone. Just one essentially makes up with it by pumping out more total testosterone. So don't worry about SHBG. It's more like an intermediary mediator, essentially. It's like the pipes in which the water flows through, but in the end, it's the output that matters. So don't stress too much about it. We're coming up on time. Looks like a member of ours said, I've been taking the enclomiphene before bed and I've been waking up with morning wood and I love it. Great. Yeah, some people do take it before bed. Now, we don't generally recommend that because it is stimulating. And so for some people, the energy increase, obviously you don't want at night because it can mess with your sleep. So if that works for you, great. If it doesn't interfere with your sleep, it's fine. But generally, we recommend most people take it first thing in the morning. And that way you'll feel the energy effects because you're obviously awake during the day, and it generally has a 10.5-hour half-life. And so it's the perfect amount of time, in fact, for you to have a energetic, productive work day. So I don't think there's a wrong time to take it. I always say, hey, look, take it at the time in which you can take it consistently every day and not miss a dosage. That's actually the most important thing. But generally, I would say morning is better just because it has less likely to interfere with sleep. But if you're fine taking it before bed and that's the time that you remember to take it, no problem with that either. So awesome. All right, that is our show for today. Thanks everyone for joining us on Instagram. Thanks everyone who joining us. We had a caller on Zoom. Thanks for all the questions that are coming in through YouTube Live. And it looks like we got a couple people on Twitter Spaces. Shout out to the Twitter folks. It looks like using this Twitter handle versus my other one resulted in more folks. So really appreciate that. I guess we have one last question I can sneak in here. Do you believe the government artificially purposely made the normal range lower to avoid testosterone black market access abuse? That's a really great question. So what this person is referring to is the reference ranges in the labs. So when you go get a lab test for testosterone, there's a range of what's considered normal. Most labs put that reference range between the 2.5 to the 97.5 percentile, meaning what applies to 95% of people. There's a couple labs out there like ZRT that do between the 20th and the 80th, but almost all the major labs, Quest and LabCorp, which are like the two big players in the market, usually do between the 2.5 to 97.5 percentile. Back in the day, high testosterone, meaning above 97.5 percentile, used to be in the 1100s. It's actually been shifted down to the 900s. And it's because, well, testosterone's dropping. You don't see a guy who's naturally above 1,000 anymore. They're like a freak. And it's the same thing. The lower end of the range has been moved as well. So there's a conspiracy theory. I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory, but there's a speculation that it's been purposely moved because in order to get on TRT, you have to be below the reference range, usually below 300 approximately. Some of the reference ranges are now like 292, I think, maybe even 260. And so if you don't test under that twice, insurance actually won't reimburse for testosterone replacement therapy. So I don't think it's the government. Is it the payers, the insurance companies that are doing that? Who knows? But they do have disproportionate influence on our healthcare system. So it's quite frankly possible. I just think it's silly to base it on lab numbers anyway, because there's lots of things that influence those numbers, and people can also cheat. So that's why I really think our philosophy, our advisors' philosophy, who are all medical school professors, of treat symptoms, not numbers, is a smarter approach than an arbitrary cutoff of lab numbers, because everyone feels different on and feels optimal on different numbers anyway. Your 500 is different than my 500, or my 100 free testosterone is different than your 100 free testosterone. Everyone's sort of unique, and so chasing numbers, I think, is wrong. It's better to use numbers to be sort of directionally guide you rather than obsess about chasing a particular number. In the end, how you feel and how you function is always the most important thing in life. And I always encourage people too. I'm like, listen to your body. We're so disconnected from our bodies these days that we obsess about numbers. And I'm like, do you feel good in the morning? Do you have good focus? Do you have good energy? Do you have good sex life? Do you feel connected with people in the meaningful relationships that you have? Because in the end, that's what matters in life. All right, that is our show for today. Thank you, everyone. You can join us every Thursday at 6 to 7 Pacific on whatever your favorite social media channel is. And if you want to continue the conversation online, we can do so asynchronously on our Maximus Tribe community. We have about 2,000 guys on there chatting about everything health optimization. And you can join that at discord.maximustribe.com. Obviously, if you're interested in any of our products, check out our website, maximustribe.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful Thursday.